Hello everyone, I'm Nine Dots. Recently, the smoke of war in the Middle East has once again captured the world's attention, with the joint military actions taken by the United States and Israel against Iran. The entire global geopolitical chessboard is shaking violently. The direct parties to this conflict are obviously the US, Israel, and Iran. If we talk about the regions most deeply dragged into this, people naturally think of the Arab countries around the Gulf like Qatar, the UAE, or Saudi Arabia. However, an interesting phenomenon is happening right now, both in the global English speaking media and on Chinese domestic social media. Most of the focus and the speculation has centered on a country far away from the Middle East crossfire. That country is China. Western media and the strategic analysts are all fixating on one question: what does this war actually mean for China? Why does almost all mainstream opinion believe that China is the major power most profoundly affected by this conflict? In the common Western perception, China and Iran seem to have formed a de facto alliance based on their shared stance of countering American hegemony. In the face of the fierce storm of severe Western economic sanctions and political isolation, the cooperation between China and Iran in energy, economics, and even strategy has been unapologetically laid out on the table. Therefore, this war has pushed a highly thorny problem, one that could even shape the future world order, right in front of China. When Iran suffers a devastating blow under the banner of anti Americanism as a brother fighting side by side on many issues, should China step in to help? Should China pull Iran out of the fire? Behind this question lies an incredibly complex web of great power politics and historical grievances. But for China's current decision makers, this is an unavoidable reality check that strikes right at the soul. To save or not to save, that is the question. Right now, the picture we see on the international stage is this: China has firmly stepped up to support Iran on a diplomatic and a moral level. But if you look closely at any actions of real substance, especially military or strong economic countermeasures, it's almost a blank sheet, a blank slate. You could say that China's support currently remains purely at the level of verbal statements. In the cruel reality of international politics, when you face an ally backed into a corner but choose not to move, there are usually only three logical explanations. Either you don't dare to save them, you don't want to save them, or you simply lack the power to do so. Interwoven in this is the fear of all out confrontation with a superpower, the ceiling of one's own military capabilities, or an even deeper reason, the true evaluation of this ally's strategic value. Today, we're going to deeply unpack these three core logics. Why is China currently choosing to watch the fire from the opposite bank? And in the final moments of this crisis, is there any chance China will lend Iran a helping hand? Before we dive into this, we must first clear up a basic fact. We have to shatter a cognitive filter that Western media has held for a long time. We must reposition the true relationship between China and Iran under international law and actual historical context. Many Western observers take it for granted that China must extend a helping hand to Iran at this critical moment, because once the US completely controls the Middle East and clips these anti American wings, China's strategic survival space on the world stage will be squeezed to the absolute limit. A popular domino theory suggests that after the US deals with Venezuela, the next step is uprooting Iran, and then they might conveniently take care of Cuba. When these little brothers taking the bullets on the front lines are cleared out one by one, the ultimate spearhead will inevitably point at China and Russia. If the lips are gone, the teeth will grow cold. So, if we don't fight to the death now, when will we? Some radicals think tanks have even floated a crazy besiege way to rescue Zhao concept. They suggest China should use this opportunity to take direct military action in the Taiwan Strait. The idea is to use a storm in East Asia to forcibly divert America's attention, thereby breaking the siege on Iran. No matter how wild the outside speculation gets, the first thing I need to clarify for everyone is China's explicit rules of international relations. If anyone thinks China is obligated to provide military protection just because Iran is attacked, they have completely misunderstood China's diplomatic DNA. Looking across the globe, China's massive military force only has an absolute, legally binding obligation of military assistance to exactly one country in the world. That country is North Korea, DPRK. This stems from the Sino-North Korean Mutual Aid and Cooperation Friendship Treaty, signed after that brutal Korean War in the 1950s. For Western audiences, you can understand this as a collective defense mechanism similar to NATO's Article 5. The treaty clearly stipulates that if either contracting party is subjected to armed attack by any state, the other party must immediately render military and other assistance by all means at its disposal. Simply put, attacking North Korea is equal to directly declaring war on China. This Cold War era treaty still holds unshakable legal power today. This also explains why, during many geopolitical crises, even when North Korea conducts nuclear tests, the US always maintains extreme strategic restraint. Because Washington knows very well that touching North Korea will directly trigger an all out war with China. If the US were to launch a surgical strike against North Korea like they do with Iran, China would have no choice but to honor the treaty and join the war. Since neither Washington nor Beijing is ready to welcome World War III, the powder keg of the Korean peninsula is tightly suppressed by a terrifying balance of power. So, when we discuss whether China should send troops for Iran, it's best to grasp this basic historical common sense first. Except for North Korea, China has no such if they hit you, I must fight military binding agreement with any other country in the world. If we rank allies according to China's meticulously worded official diplomatic rhetoric, the first tier is undeniably North Korea, enjoy mutual military assistance. So, when does Iran rank? Where does Iran rank in this system? The answer might shock a lot of people. Iran doesn't even make it into the top four tiers. The second tier is called the All Weather Strategic Cooperative Partnership. This means no matter how the international winds change, day or night, rain or shine, the two countries are deeply bound, die-hard brothers. The only country in this tier are Pakistan and Belarus. The third tier is the permanent comprehensive strategic partnership. Although it drops the absolute prefix of all weather, it emphasizes long term stability in the dimension of time. Take Kazakhstan, a key Central Asian neighbor, for example. For the country like this, one that poses no threat and is full of willingness to cooperate, China is happy to maintain permanent peace and mutual benefit. The fourth tier is the one the Western world pays the most attention to: Russia. Its exclusive title is Comprehensive Strategic Partnership of Coordination for a New Era. Please note the words New Era, which are full of Eastern philosophical nuance. This actually hints at a phased alliance formed based on the current pressure of countering the US and the West. Historically, that Russia polar bear poses massive threats to China's territory and security. Even today, beneath the table of their seemingly tight cooperation, there is still plenty of mutual guard and secret maneuvering. Once this new era of jointly fighting the West passes, the relationship between the two sides will face the unknown prospect of another reshuffle. It's only when you count down to the fifth or sixth tier that you see an official sounding name: Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. And Iran sits exactly in this tier. Sharing this group with Iran are countries like Italy, Spain, and Australia. When you hear that Iran is on the same diplomatic level as these countries, some of which are firmly in the Western camp, you start to understand something. This so called Iron Blood Sino-Iranian alliance is mostly just a short term marriage of convenience born out of sanctions. In plainer terms, China and North Korea are life and death brothers with historical blood ties. China and Pakistan are loyal, ride or die buddies. But when it comes to Iran, they are just the regular friends doing business. This means China can trade and exchange resources with Iran economically, but legally and morally, there is absolutely zero obligation to bleed or sacrifice to protect Iran. Only by understanding this seemingly close but actually distant relationship can we truly read China's cold, sideline observation in this crisis. Next, I want to talk about a more hidden and even cruel reality. Since China officially has no treaty obligation to defend Iran, are they really the kind of back to back life and death brothers in their secret bilateral cooperation? Many people see China buying cheap Iranian oil while facing down Western sanctions. They see China pouring massive funds into helping Iran build infrastructures. They then naturally assume that to fight their common European and American enemies, these two countries are deeply intertwined. But I must tell you all, real international politics is far dirtier and more complex than it appears on the surface. To understand the fragility of this surface level intimacy, we must first see through the political structure of Iran. It is essentially a regime dominated by clerks. The true lifeblood of the country's economy is firmly controlled by religious foundations and Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. For Western audiences, you can understand it as a highly opaque, theocratic, dictatorial complex. When dealing with such a regime, and interactions are based on naked, calculated interests. In their philosophy of survival, The spirit of contract and the moral credibility valued by the modern international community simply don't exist as long as there is enough temptation of profit or external pressure. Allies can become bargaining chips on the negotiating table at any moment. Let's look back at a few real cases that caused massive shockwaves in the international business and geopolitical circles. A sensational event in China involved Meng Wanzhou, an executive of the Chinese military-backed company Huawei, and the daughter of Huawei's boss Ren Zhengfei, who was detained in Canada for 3 long years. The reason the US launched its long arm jurisdiction was that Huawei violated sanctions by secretly trading with Iran. But few people know exactly where the US got that bulletproof, that evidence. This actually traces back to the 2014 Iran nuclear negotiations. At the time, the US froze a massive $8 billion of Iranian assets overseas to get this life saving money unfrozen and to show Washington their sincerity in negotiations. Iran did the unthinkable. They directly handed over the top secret trading records of 68 Chinese companies, including Huawei, right to the United States. It was exactly within this evidence that the detailed agreements of Meng Wanzhou's company helping Iran build its communication network were found. Chinese companies took on the massive risk of secondary Western sanctions to help Iran get through a crisis, and in return, they were ruthlessly sold out by this ally just so Iran could secure its own interests. In Western political ethics, this is a classic double agent style betrayal. The exact same story played out again in 2017. At that time, another Chinese tech giant, ZTE, was slapped with a sky high $1.19 billion fine by the US. The reason was identical. ZTE's internal trading data with Iran was leaked to the US by the Iranian government as a bargaining chip. This caused ZTE's core component supply chain to be completely severed, pushing them to the brink of bankruptcy. Let's put aside the uh, compliance controversies in international trade for a moment. Simply from the angle of betrayal, Iran's actions are deeply chilling. Iran's diplomatic uh, pendulum actually follows a highly utilitarian pattern. Whenever the news of Western sanctions tightens, they show an extremely cozy posture towards China. But the moment European and American sanctions loosen up, they immediately turn around and jump right back into the arms of the West. The flip flopping and inconsistency has been on full display during major strategic cooperation. In 2015, China and Iran reached letters of intent for 14 mega infrastructure projects. This included the Tehran metro extensions and the Isfahan refinery, with an expected total investment of up to $12 billion. The Chinese side put massive resources into completing all the preliminary prep work. The result? The moment sanctions eased, Iran handed these projects straight over to European companies, completely standing China up. Even worse is the strategic game surrounding the Chabahar port. This port is adjacent to the Gulf of Oman and holds extreme geopolitical hub value in China's Belt and Road initiative. Massive Chinese state owned enterprises invested hundreds of millions of RMB and essentially completed the hardest parts of dredging and early infrastructure. Yet, just as the project was about to bear fruit, Iran started throwing up endless roadblocks. They not only set up hurdle after hurdle regarding the military and the trade uses of the port, but in the end, they actually burned the bridge and handed the operating rights of the strategic port over to India. You have to understand, on the geopolitical map of the entire Eurasian continent, India is China's primary regional competitor. Handing a Chinese built strategic asset over to a Chinese rival's dumb Beijing, even more than leaking commercial secrets to America. Fast forward to 2021. Although China and Iran signed a 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement, the reality is dark. In the actual implementation of economics, energy, and strategy, Iran is still constantly changing its mind and secretly setting up obstacles. Even in the oil trade they rely on the most, this mutual deception has never stopped. Because of the global blockade, Iran's oil can pretty much only be sold to a single buyer, China. Around this energy lifeline, the two sides have engaged in a brutally ruthless shadow wrestling match. Iran once stored 3.4 million tons of crude oil in China's Dalian and Zhoushan ports, but owed China $450 million in storage fees. When pressed for payment, they not only refused to pay, but often deliberately delayed shipments even after receiving China's money. This forced China to eventually adopt an extreme hardline buyer's monopoly strategy. China uses a massive fleet of ghost ships for at sea crude oil transfers to evade U.S. sanction surveillance. At the same time, they push the price to the absolute bottom and force a rule that payment is only settled after cargo arrives at China's ports. Because when it comes to business credibility, China has completely lost faith in its sweet talking partner. Interestingly, public opinion inside Iran has turned around and accused China of being an extremely selfish oil merchant. These accusations have been brewing within Iran for years now. This perfectly shows just how deep the cracks are when it comes to being trade partners and building strategic trusts. If you put yourself in the shoes of a national decision maker, would you be willing to bleed and fight for such a treacherous regime? Furthermore, in the grand narrative of international morality, protecting a theocratic dictatorship that oppresses its own people is a highly unrewarding move. The Arab countries in the Middle East and around the Gulf are already full of uh, vigilance and hostility toward Iran's expansionism. If China forces its head out at this sensitive moment and deeply binds itself to a regime with a notorious international reputation, that is no different from tying itself to the chariot of the axis of evil. This would be a devastating blow to the image of the peaceful builder, major power that China has always strived to project. So back to our original question. Why did China immediately pull its brother up? Beyond whether they dare to, there is a far more crucial emotional and rational judgment. They don't want to save them. However, the paradox of international politics is this. Even if you despise this mud pit, you might already be too deeply stuck in it to easily pull yourself out. This is the most painful strategic tightrope Beijing is walking right now. When you are deeply bound in core interests with a force you don't trust and even somewhat dislike, once that force faces collapse, your national interests will also suffer an unprecedented historic blow. This is the harsh reality that truly makes Beijing feel like it has a dagger at its back. Next, we must face the ultimate dilemma that is suffocating Chinese decision makers. If you don't give this brother a hand, what kind of devastating blows will China's own interests suffer? This is not alarmist talk. These are four brutal, ex- escalating strategic realities. The first is the energy lifeline that directly chokes the throat of the Chinese economy. Ever since Iran was isolated by the international financial system, 90% of its oil exports have flowed to China. China relies on this Gulf nation for 13% of its total oil, and this oil comes at a massive discount. What's more fatal is if the flames of war lead to the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the global energy artery. All the liquefied natural gas China imports from the Middle East, even from Qatar, would be forcibly cut off. This is equivalent to directly severing more than half of China's energy supply line. If crude oil can't get in, domestic gas prices will inevitably skyrocket, triggering catastrophic imported inflation. For a Chinese economy already in the painful throes of transition, this would be an unbearable weight. The second devastating blow targets China's financial strategy to break dollar hegemony. For years, China has desperately wanted to push the internationalization of the RMB, and the core breakthrough point is establishing a petro yuan system. With great difficulty, China managed to pull Venezuela and Iran into the RMB settlement camp. Now, Maduro's regime in Venezuela is swaying in the wind, even forced to compromise with the US and use dollars. Again, if Iran, this crucial pillar, also comes crashing down, the grand blueprint of taking the RMB global will suffer a massive setback. The third level concerns China's most important global layout, the Belt and Road Initiative. On the entire Eurasian geopolitical chessboard, Iran is China's most crucial springboard expanding westward. It is one of the few strategic points in the Middle East that dares to publicly say no to Washington. If the US and Israel join hands to install a pro Western regime in Tehran, then the entire heart of the Middle East will completely degenerate into an absolute US sphere of influence. China's strategic survival space will be squeezed to the absolute limit, and its geopolitical influence in Asia will be forced into a full retreat. The fourth level is the most profound logic of global psychological warfare and a great power rival. In the past, there was an optimistic illusion that the US was retreating back to the Western Hemisphere, practicing a new era of the Monroe Doctrine. But from targeting Venezuela to Cuba and now Iran, Washington's true intentions have been completely exposed. The US doesn't just want to maintain global hegemony, it wants to systematically clip China's political wings around the world. This is just like the rules in the classic Western mafia movie. If a godfather cannot provide a protective umbrella for his followers, if he just hides in his safe house when people come knocking at the door, then the collapse of his entire family is only a matter of time. If China, at this life and death juncture, doesn't even have the courage to protect its little brother, who on the international stage will ever dare to bind their national destiny to Beijing in the future? Since not saving them leads to such a desperate situation, does China actually have the capacity to save them? This isn't just a question of willpower, it is a cold, hard test of strength. In recent conflicts, both Iran and Venezuela have equipped themselves with Chinese made HQ 9B anti aircraft systems. However, when facing US and Israeli fighter jets, these defense systems seemed virtually useless, penetrated as if the airspace was completely undefended. There are even rumors that the Beidou navigation system was downgraded right before the war, sparking intense anger within Iran. These signs ruthlessly expose that in the face of modern AI warfare systems and a lack of real combat experience, China's actual military strength still faces severe bottlenecks. Some fanatical nationalists at home are always immersed in military fantasies of instantly destroying any enemy. But the highest decision makers are extremely clear headed. They know exactly what kind of terrifying abyss they would face in a head on clash with the US military. Furthermore, Sino US relations haven't yet reached the point of being completely torn apart and entering an all out hot war. Facing the incoming visit from Trump, China still hopes to steady this massive ship through commercial procurement. To gamble the destiny of the entire nation for a discredited, inconsistent Iran is obviously sheer madness. In Western cultural context, we often use the fable of the scorpion and the frog to explain why you shouldn't save someone in desperate straits. This perfectly applies to the three risk avoidance principles of state relations. First, the other party's nature is base. They have zero spirit of contract and are ready to bite you back at any moment. Iran's behavior on the world stage and its repeatedly commercial betrayals of China perfectly fit this trait. Second, the friendship is shallow. It's merely a short term illicit union based on the pressure to resist America. This is no life and death bond forged in the trenches between China and Iran. They can cut ties and walk away at any time. Third, the price is horrifically high. It could even it could even trigger the chain reaction of World War III. An unchangeable nature, a shallow friendship, an exorbitant price tag. This is the underlying logic of why China ultimately chooses to sit on the fence and watch. Governing a massive country is like walking on the edge of the blade. There is zero room for emotional impulses. Although Chinese officials like Minister Wang Yi have issued stern warnings to Israel, that is mostly just a lip service to provide moral comfort. At the same time, short video platforms like TikTok are flooded with a populist frenzy of blindly supporting Iran, sometimes even bordering on anti human rhetoric. This kind of cognitive warfare is actively destroying the rational thinking of the Chinese public. In the intricate game of international politics, the absolute bottom line of public opinion warfare is that you cannot let your own citizens become casualties completely devoid of common sense. China's absolute core interest remains fixing its internal economy and elevating the dignity of life for its ordinary citizens. When the massive storm hits, the most rational rules of survival is always self preservation. This brings up a philosophical proportion worthy of deep thought from every Western observer. When a rising Eastern power is torn to the limit between global morality, alliance obligations, and its own core national interests? Should it play the role of an idealistic martyr dying for anti American ideology? Or a cold blooded, calculating, and perhaps even ruthless realist? China's ultimate choice rips the veil off the truest face of the modern international jungle's law. In this world full of betrayal and calculation, staying alive and giving your people a better life is the highest, most noble truth that transcends all morality. That's all for today. I'm Nine Dots. See you next time.